Hi, my name is Steve Martile, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about the source and the cause of negative people or circumstances in our lives. So, if you find that you're bouncing from positive to negative emotions, you have like this instability, like your emotions are up one day, you feel like you're just in love, and then you feel depression the next day, like this bouncing, right? Where you're never sort of just at a steady, peaceful state. It's always like a huge rise in emotions, ecstatic, and then another day like fear, depression. And you're never in that center place in the middle where you feel just at peace. You might be wondering why. So, the reason why is because you haven't processed some thought or emotional impressions. There's a word in an Indian word called Sanskara, which represents these impressions. So, what is an impression? It's a psychological or emotional imprint. Okay? And the reason I have this diagram here in the background is because these psychological imprints that we have affect our biofield. Okay? Now, if you don't know what a biofield is, it's the field of intention that creates our body. Okay? It's not that our body creates this field, it's the other way around. And there's science to back this up. Now, I talk about it in my new book, which will be coming out this month, but these biofields get disturbed when these psychological imprints are triggered. And that's the main reason that you have these ups and downs, right? And you know what's interesting is that no amount of affirmations, positive affirmations, can get you out of that endless loop of up and down emotions. Okay, and I'm going to talk about the solution to this, and it's rarely done by most people, but it's something that I've been practicing for quite a few years, and I've come back to it again most recently, and it's amazingly valuable, being the witness to these emotions and these thought impressions. Before we go down that route, what I want to talk to a little bit about is when you attract these people that are either negative circumstances or negative people in your life, what's happening is you're making an interpretation of what's happening on the outside. That person might not be negative at all. That circumstance might not be negative, but your interpretation or your perception of it is. And the question is, why? You know, like you can have thoughts come in, like, oh, I think I'll have something to eat for lunch, or I think I'll go to the gym, or, I really want to write that article, or I got to do this thing for my boss. And nothing happens. The thought passes right through and you're fine. But then one of those thoughts comes in and then it gets stuck. And those are the ones that create the impressions, which are these psychological and emotional impressions that get lodged in your body. And when they get lodged in your body, what happens is they trigger unconsciously and they close your world. And I'll give you some examples. They'll make you feel self-conscious around other people. Like if you're normally a really outgoing or confident person, you could walk in a crowd of people and you're fine. When you have triggered these emotional or psychological imprints, you feel self-conscious. You're like really starting to consider, well, what are they talking about? Or I wonder if they're saying about what I wore today, or like, is my hair okay? And you start to really feel self-conscious. Or you get defensive when you're in a conversation with someone because you don't want to get hurt again. And that hurt could be an emotional imprint around the heart, which is what I'm going to talk about in this video. Or it could be that you're unsure of yourself. Like you are never at a place where you're at peace and center in that connection with the Creator, that you're always in a disturbance. You're always feeling like you're unsure of yourself. Like, should I do this? Should I do that? Well, what do you think? And then always like kind of not sure of yourself, not in that place of knowing. And then another one is that I talked about at the beginning is these constant emotional highs and lows. It's like one week you can be having your lifetime. It'd be the week of your lifetime. Just everything's perfect. And then something changes in your outer circumstance and then you feel really sad or upset. and you don't know why. So these impressions that we get, if they're not processed in the body, what happens is they get triggered again, and your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and you have fewer and fewer choices. And life is not really about free choice and freedom anymore. It's about adapting to the psychological impressions you're getting, and changing your life around you to navigate around these impressions so they don't get disturbed, so you don't get hurt, so they don't get triggered. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. And there's kind of two ways around this. And one other actually symptom of these impressions being triggered, regardless if it's an emotional impression or a psychological one, is that you find you have a lack of inner trust. It's like you know there are things that you could be doing or want to do, but you don't trust yourself to actually follow through with them. So again, either an emotional or psychological imprint in your body. And your body stores these impressions. Now, how do these impressions originate? Well, something happens to on the outside, then your psyche is pulling the information in, the data, and then all of a sudden you resist it, and that's when you create the imprint. So I'll give you a really good example. So 2010, 2011, I was working in this big engineering firm, and the day-to-day was pretty intense. I'd get 70, 80 emails a day, responsible for a team of people, and I'd constantly have a bombardment of information coming my way. Now, after about 3 or 4 years being there, I was like, oh, it's just a toxic environment. When I reflect back, the truth of it is, yeah, there were a lot of people that were in a, let's just say, a more dense vibration that wasn't in line with where I wanted to be, but more importantly, I was getting information from the outside that was triggering these impressions inside of me, and then my world was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, I eventually left that job because of this reason. I started to get heart palpitations, and I felt like I was going to die in the office, like in the next few weeks. And this was around November, December of one year. I just felt like I'm not going to last. I'm going to have a heart attack right on the ground, and I'm going to have all these regrets that I didn't leave this place. But the reality is that spiritually, I wasn't ready for the bombardment of these impressions, and I wasn't willing to process them, and I was just didn't know how to do it. And so I had a lot of these symptoms: lack of inner trust, self-conscious around other people, unsure of myself, constantly having high emotional highs and lows. And so I know what it's like to be in this place. But what I can tell you is that there's really two ways around this situation. One is you rearrange the outside world to conform to these triggers that you have inside of you, psychological or emotional, so that you don't trigger the impression. And that's what 99% of people do, and that's what I did. I left that job. And spiritually, I wasn't ready to process all these, triggers that I was getting in these impressions, these psychological impressions I was having. It would have been great if I would have been able to let them go. It would have been a very massive opportunity for me, but I didn't know how to do it, and I wasn't willing to do it. I was resisting the outside. I was almost fighting the outside. It got to that point where everything was a fight on the outside. Now, if you feel that way now, that you're having you get into these situations with people, or you're in circumstances where you're getting into these fights, where you constantly feel like you have to resist the outside, that's a psychological or emotional impression. And if you don't let go of it, then you're going to continue to rearrange your outside world, your life, so it doesn't trigger that impression for the rest of your life. You might not date certain people, you might not work certain places, just because you don't want to be triggered. And the key thing is to recognize that there's an outside world and an inside world, and the outside, if it triggers the inside, it's an opportunity to let go. What we do instead is we automatically resist, and then when we resist, it gives that impression life. It keeps it alive. And so for the next time it gets triggered, it's still there. And you want to think of these impressions in your body as like a computer with a little window or a little app on your phone, for example. And that little app, even though it's not open, it's not running right now, It's constantly sending out and receiving signals. And it's just waiting to be activated. And then when it does, it gets activated. So for me, when I was at this job, what would happen is I would get, information coming from a lot of clients and a lot of different people that I was interacting with, engineers, technologists. And what they would do is the information would bombard me from the outside. And for most of it, probably like 99% of it, it would pass right through me. It would go in and then would go out. The thought would come in, it would go out. And that was it. Except when the information got stuck. And that was with a specific client. And I remember I would get up, have my coffee in the morning, go through like 15 emails, and then I'd see the one client, and I'm like, oh, I just have that, my heart would drop. And that would be the client that was causing this trigger that I wasn't willing to let go. So I would resist it, and guess what would happen? It would keep it alive. And so there's two things that you can do. There's really two choices. You either resist the outside and you rearrange your life to get around these impressions from triggering you, or you recognize that these triggers, these things that are triggering these impressions, these psychological and emotional impressions, are an opportunity to be the witness and just to allow them process through your body. And if you can do that, then that impression will then let go. And if you can keep doing that, what will happen is another one will let go. And eventually, nothing on the outside will get to a place where it affects you because you've let go of those impressions and that stored energy in your body. Okay? So you just have to be open and allow the information to be processed through your body. You can do that through dreams, which is when we do it anyways. You do it through meditation. And basically, the way that you do it is when you're in a witness state during the day. You're just the observer to your emotions and your thoughts, and you're not taking anything personally. You're just noticing and watching. You're just observing and noticing and being the witness. You're being the seer. And you're not trying to do anything about the emotions. You might feel, a little bit of burning around the heart, but then it goes away. It dissipates because you allow it to process through your body. Now, one thing I wanted to show you was that these impressions, as they're going through your body, now let's say you're having a psychological one, that might be, say, somewhere here, okay? Or you might be having one in the heart area, around the heart chakra, right here. Now, those are two different types of impressions that you can be having. What happens is information comes in, okay, and it triggers that impression, the heart closes, and then the information is not allowed to be processed. It gets stuck in the heart. Another way that happens is you have something, that information you get from, I don't know, it could be like a client, or it could be a relationship that you were in. And all of a sudden, you get that information coming in, and it triggers that in your mind. And then that thought leads to resistance. And then you don't feel okay. Or you feel like after that moment, when you get triggered by someone that maybe you were dating or an old relationship, that you're just not okay inside anymore. And when you feel that, that means that that impression has been triggered. Now you might be fine for a couple days, and then you kind of you're over it and you forgot about it. And then you're kind of going about your day again. But then it gets triggered again. And this time, again, you feel it again, and you're start taking things personal. And you start to realize oh man, I'm that thing that came up last time, it came up again. And so what happens is the information comes in and it gets stored in the body and it isn't able to process. That's an impression. That's a psychological impression. That's an emotional impression. The heart closes. And when the heart closes, guess what happens to the biofield? This biofield shrinks down. It gets really small. And if that biofield is really tiny, it means your energy has started to get more dense and less influential. And so if you're having trouble attracting the things that you want in your life, and you're used to be good at manifesting, but then all of a sudden changed, it may be these psychological or emotional impressions. So I'm here to tell you that on one side, it's great to have affirmations and it's great to have intention. But if you don't monitor and get in the witness state so that you're aware when you get triggered, and then let it go so that the information that comes into the heart is then allowed to leave. Once you do that and it passes right through you, then you're allowed to let it go. That energy dissipates, and then your biofield returns back to its optimal state, right? And you got to remember, this biofield affects your biology. It's the field that affects matter. So if you're not feeling so good right now, it may be that you need a tune-up, and you need to let go of some of these triggers that are being processed through these psychological or emotional impressions, okay? Best way is to get into some sort of meditation and start to practice getting into the witness state. Just be an observer to your experience. Now, if you don't feel that you can do that on your own and you want some help, then I'm happy to do that with you. I jump on a call with you and we can talk through your situation specifically. I've worked with all kinds of different people all around the world. And at the end of that call, it's a free call. I'll let you know if something I can help you with. And if I can't, then I'll tell you. But if I can, and I'm confident that I'm able to help you and that you're willing to change in order to let go of this thing that's been either blocking you or basically preventing you from like living your life fully, then I'll talk about the fee, the investment, and what's involved for us to do it. Okay? And there's a link below to my calendar below if that interests you. Awesome. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if this is a great video that you know someone could at least hear about this and learn more about it, please share it with them. Thanks for watching and listening. My name's Steve, and I'll talk to you next time.